So, I guess I should start at the beginning, huh? You probably don't remember any of it now, but we used to spend loads of time talking. When I arrived at Broadhof, I was assigned to escorting the patients during their time out in the yard. You know, give the new pony something easy and time-consuming to see how she does. As it turned out, I was assigned to escort you on my first day, and so we talked about all sorts of things. Well, that's not entirely true. When I first met you, you didn't talk much. At all, really. You were as silent as a snake without a hiss. Being a new doctor, I was pretty dang nervous, so I just chattered away like a squirrel regardless. I talked about life back on the farm, my time in Manhattan, and even my years in school. You never said anything back, so I just kept talking and talking to fill the silence until the 2 hours had passed and it was time for supper. I nearly talked your ears off that first day. Afterwards, I wondered if you had even heard a word I said. After all, you had just been quietly following beside me as we walked along the fence. After a few days, you know, I can tell you don't remember any of that. I think I have a better idea actually. Why don't I just tell you about myself, so you can hear those stories again? Maybe something I would say will help, you know, jog your memory some. So, let's see. Well, I was born on a sweet Apple Acres farm just outside Ponyville. My parents were good, honest pony folk, simple farmers whose hard work on the family farm had really helped build it up. I guess you do remember my older brother Big Macintosh, but I also had a baby sister, Apple Bloom. Oh, you remember her name too? Super! I guess telling you about my past again is the right thing to do. Anyway, life was pretty good, I reckon. Sure, growing up on a farm means lots of work, even when you're just a foal, but I never had much room to complain, and farm work was always secondary to school work. It was always our parents' dream that we might all get a good education, probably because neither of them ever finished school. Being an earth pony don't mean you got to be a dummy. Pa used to tell us. Our parents were very adamant about us doing well in school, and they gave us extra chores if our grades went up to snuff. So yeah, they took our education real serious like. We did pretty well for farm foals too. Shoot, Big Macintosh was planning on becoming an engineer back before my parents passed away. He did always have a good head for figures and such. Not much of a conversationalist, but I don't doubt that he could have made a great architect or something just as prestigious. I tell you, they were so proud of him when he got accepted to Canterlot Polytechnic. Even Pa was crying. Big Mac was the first apple since we had settled near Ponyville to get accepted into a university. College wasn't cheap, though, and we made do as best as we could. Cutting back here, working harder there, that sort of thing. But after Pa got sick, well, Macintosh had to spend more and more time on the farm lending a hoof. Pa tried his best to keep working, but soon enough the cancer had him bedridden. Apple Bloom was still in diapers back then, and I was much older than she is now. So Big Mac, Granny, and Ma had to do all the harvesting together. Ma tried her best to keep Big Mac in school though, never letting him know just how much he was doing around the farm. She forbid him from dropping any classes, so he only came down on the weekends to help out. And she'd get up long before the sunrise so she could do some of his chores as well. She didn't want him being so tired that when he went back to school it could hurt his grades. Like I said, they really thought our educations were important. Big Mac kept offering to quit school so he could do more to help the family. He said he could just take a semester or two off, but she wouldn't hear of it. It would have been for the best if she had, in retrospect, but then, as my optometrist friends always said, hindsight is 20/20. I think she convinced herself that Pa was going to get better. She wanted to keep everything as normal as possible, so when he got well it would be like nothing had changed at all. And so every day, week after week, she worked her hoofs to the bone doing the chores of 3 ponies. It left her so tired that she'd pass out after supper. So, when Pa finally passed away, she was just too worn out to handle it. The doctor said it was severe exhaustion along with some other things I was too young to understand or remember. I think it was the girl that hurt her the most. She had been so busy trying to work the farm, she'd never had time to see him. And being unable to say goodbye is what I reckon broke her heart. Because after the funeral, she was just a shell of a pony. She was physically there, but empty. That's when Big Mac finally did drop out of school. Just a year or so before he would have graduated. He gave up his dreams and his future so he could take care of the family, and he He never complained about it either. Celestia, bless him. Not for one gosh darn minute. I tell you, Twilight, Big Mac is the best stallion in Equestria. A lot of ponies underestimate him, thinking he's just a bit slow because he's so quiet all the time. But they're dead wrong. He knew exactly what he was giving up, and he did it without a second of hesitation. That takes real hard. That's love. It was right before I started high school that Ma finally passed away. After Pa had died, she just shut down, and we had taken her to Broadhope for care. She barely spoke, and mostly just lay in bed staring out of the window. Whenever I visited, it was hard to think of her as being the same mare I remembered from back when I was barely a filly. The strength and vitality was gone. She was like those husks of once fruitful apple trees that had slowly withered away, still clinging to life by the narrowest of margins. Life was really tough during those years. I was finally old enough to really start pulling my weight around the farm, but Big Mac wouldn't allow me to sacrifice my schooling for the farm as well. I used to throw the biggest fits, I did, complaining about how unfair it was that I couldn't skip school to help out like he did. But he was as adamant about me getting education as Ma and Pa had been, and Granny backed him up completely. Both of them weren't going to allow me and Applebloom to miss out on the future our parents had dreamed of. I used to resent Big Mac's decision. It wasn't until I had matured that I realized just how much he had surrendered to keep me and Applebloom in school. Big Mac had sacrificed his future for the family, and he wouldn't allow me to do the same. I saw it as my duty, to him and the memory of my parents, to get a good education. Having lost both of my parents to illness is what convinced me to go into medicine. After I graduated high school, I set about applying to medical schools all over Equestria, and my grades were good enough to earn me a small scholarship to boot. However, it was still true that university isn't cheap, and even with my scholarship, nearly every school was far too expensive for us to afford, both in terms of tuition and in housing. The reason I chose Manhattan was almost entirely because my aunt and Uncle Orange offered free room and board in the city. Without their help, I'd never had been able to become a doctor. Now, I did spend some time with the Oranges, back when I was just a filly. Uncle Orange had always been a bit unfriendly towards my pa, blaming him for taking his sister away to live out in the sticks, but they were good folk. Sure, they were what you might call high society types, but they were still family, and they were determined to help me out as best as they could. We Eppis don't accept charity though, not when we can do something about it, so I accepted on the condition that I would be allowed to help pull my weight around the apartment. It was charity in all but name, considering how I was doing some light cleaning up and such while they were housing and feeding a full-grown mare, but it helped make me feel less like I was taking advantage of their hospitality. University life wasn't easy. I had been quite naive when I arrived, and the first real shock was how biased the system was against non-unicorn doctors. It wasn't like being a millionaire or a guard or a factory worker, where any pony can succeed and do well. Magical ability is an unspoken prerequisite for some fields. Surgeons, for example, are almost exclusively unicorns. I choose to go into psychiatry mostly because of having had to watch Ma deteriorate over the years. There was one visit, the last time I heard her speak, when I had brought Applebloom with me so she could see Ma again. She was weak and sickly, but she was happy to see us. Applebloom ran up to her and smiled and hugged, and then she looked Applebloom right in the eyes and said with a broad smile on her face, "Oh, Applejack, you're getting so big. Be sure to take care of your little sister, you understand?" Trapped within her memories, she couldn't even recognize her family anymore. Thankfully, Applebloom was too young to remember it, but I cried all night once we left. It was that moment, if anything, that made me realize my future. If there was anything I could do to help others from feeling the same sort of pain, I wanted to do what I could. That's how I ended up specializing in the treatment of hallucinations and delusions. Big Mac once joked that I did it because I was too darn honest for my own good, and I wanted to help the patient see the truth. There might be a sliver of truth to that, as I can have a bit of a black and white view on the world. So I found my calling in psychiatry, because psychiatry has plenty of non-unicorns in it. I avoided the worst of the prejudice, but even in Manhattan, which is as metropolitan and multicultural a city as there is in Equestria, I still got dirty looks from unicorns who scoffed at the idea of an earth pony becoming a doctor. Of course, that just made me work even harder. Us Apples are stubborn folk, and the thought of them looking down their noses at me just because I didn't have a horn really got me going. I wasn't the smartest pony in school, but I was angry and I worked as hard as I ever had at the farm. I was determined to show them up. And boy, did I. I wasn't the top of my class, but I was darn close. Twilight, the satisfaction I felt when I was standing up on that stage as I read out my accomplishments, it was something real magical. And after graduation I applied for residency here at Broadhof. After all, it was close to home, and because Ma had been here during the last couple of years of her life, I felt a bit of a connection with the place. Now, I know I've said it a few times, but I'm going to say it again. Going to university is mighty expensive. And while I was away at school, Big Mac had to run the farm on his own. Apple Bloom was old enough to do some of the chores, but she couldn't do too much, not while still having to go to school and such. And Granny, well, she's too old to be doing a lot of physical work on the farm these days, even though she's still hazy for a mare of her years. A couple of fast-talking city ponies came to the farm offering some fancy machines of theirs that were supposed to speed up the whole process and take care of some of the work, but Big Mac and Granny wouldn't consider it. Apple Family Cider is made by her with love and care, and making it faster wasn't worth losing that special something that really made it so darn delicious. Instead, we ended up taking out loans to help pay for my tuition and books and such. Some of the fields went fallow just because we couldn't walk them. Already in debt because of tuition, there weren't any bits available for hired hooves. Money was real tight. It still is, really. And even though it was my responsibility to try and make the best of myself, I still feel guilty for going off to college while Big Mac and Apple Bloom stayed on the farm. We owed the bank a lot of money, and if there had been a bad harvest or two, we might have lost it all while I was away in the big city. But again, Big Mac never once blamed me for anything, no matter how bad things got. Thankfully, now that I'm out of school, I'm earning a paycheck as well. In fact, with my salary, we've actually been able to afford some hired help for this year's harvest. Sure, Big Mac will grumble a bit about them not being as handy on the farm as an apple would be, but that's just part of his character. He might have a heart of gold, but he's a proud and stubborn apple, through and through. I'm back living on the farm too, which means I can help out during my days off. We have reopened the fields we had left fallow now that we have the horsepower to walk them all, so this year's crop should help repay some of our debts. So, what else? Oh right, I almost forgot I was telling you about back when we first met, Twilight. Well, like I said, you didn't say much initially, but since I was a new mare, it was part of my job to help escort our patients around the yard for their daily exercise, and so I would spend the time talking, and you'd spend it listening, and we stroll around the yard enjoying the sun. I didn't know if you enjoyed our time together, or if you were even listening, but it helped me to think I had a kind ear and some pony to talk to, and boy, did I need it. School teaches you a lot of things, Twilight, but a diploma and years of training doesn't prepare you for the reality of working within a psychiatric hospital. It can break you down if you don't have an outlet for it. I thought that, since I had a rough childhood and I watched my masters come to dementia, that I was well prepared, but I sure learned pretty quickly that no, I wasn't. A month after I'd arrived, I was feeling pretty good about myself. I knew the routines, I was getting familiar with patients like you, and nothing major had happened yet. Dr. Rose was impressed enough with my progress that I was assigned a small bi-weekly therapy group to run. It was nothing major, just the chance to get some of our stable but introverted patients to spend some time with other ponies. One patient was this quiet Pegasus mare. She was so terribly anxious that she would sit as far away from the rest of the group as she could, and she'd freeze up and go almost catatonic whenever any pony tried to talk to her. She'd only talk to me during those sessions, and then it was just one-word answers. What? Yeah, Dreamer, she's the one that they let keep all the birds. Don't call her that, she has a name, you know. No, I can't say it aloud with Twilight here, but regardless, it certainly isn't something as rude as Bird Girl. I swear, you've been reading too many of them articles in the papers. One doctor tells a reporter with a flair for the dramatic about a patient with some birds, and all of a sudden she's raising 100 eagles in the attic. What's worse is how many ponies believe it. I even had some pony ask me when I was shopping if the bird girl of Broadhof was actually a distant relative of the princess locked away in a tower because she was mad. Yeah, I know you don't mean it like that, Dreamer, and I'm sorry for snapping at you and all, but we need to treat her with respect. Most of you doctors who work outside the psych yard have some pretty strong misconceptions about our patients. always believing whatever story you hear. So, where was I? Okay, yeah, the group was fine despite the extreme shyness all around. We were just starting and the idea was to keep things nice and calm so we could expose them to constructive social interaction. We had little show and tell events where they could present a drawing or pictures they had done. This Pegasus couldn't bring herself to speak, so I would hold up her item to show the others, which obviously defeated the point of the exercise. On a recommendation from Dr. Rose, I suggested she bring one of the birds to show and tell. The mare always did seem more comfortable with animals, and she accepted. So one day she produces a small cage with this lovely yellow canary inside. She opens the cage and it hops out onto her foreleg. Then she starts telling the others in a voice barely above a whisper about her bird. It was only a few sentences, and even then no pony could hear anything anyway. But it was more than she had said in every other meeting combined. I was feeling pretty dang happy at the progress, and considering having her introduce a different bird every meeting. Anything to get her talking, you know. But then one of the patients, another Pegasus, takes to the air and zooms in closer, hovering a yard away to get a better look at the bird. This startles the bird and it shoots off in the other direction, flying right at another patient's face. Before anyone can so much as blink, the pony screams in fear and takes a wide swing at the bird, knocking it to the ground. The mare panics and rushes to the bird's side while I have to get the orderlies to help restore order. So we send the patients back to their rooms, including the mare, who is by now just crying and clutching her injured bird. One of the doctors with some veterinarian practice goes to see what he can do, and we get on with the day. The next morning I get stopped by Dr. Rose before I can even change into my scrubs. He brings me into the office and tells me that we need to talk. I was expecting him to shoo me out for what had happened the day before. Instead, it turns out that the bird had died from its injuries. The mare was inconsolable after that, weeping and moaning and tugging at her mane. It took some hours to get her calmed down, but eventually they managed to get her into bed. However, when the orderlies go in to wake her up for breakfast, they find her covered in blood and barely breathing. She had broken a small mirror that had been in the bird's cage and had tried to kill herself with the shards of glass. Because she had been so stable for so long, no one ever imagined that those tiny little mirrors could be a risk, or even that she might attempt suicide. Thankfully the cuts hadn't been too deep and she survived, but I remembered feeling so insignificant at that moment. He tried to tell me it wasn't my fault and that I had been doing my best for the patients when events had conspired against me. It didn't have the sense of guilt I felt. I might not have been at fault, but I was responsible for my patients. A patient I had been helping tried to commit suicide. There's no class you can take that will prepare you for feeling that ashamed of yourself. That was my first real wake-up call about what my new career entailed. I needed a pony I could talk to. Now, because I'd been off in Manhattan for so long, I hardly knew any pony in town. The month since I moved back in didn't offer much of a chance to meet new ponies, considering how busy I was between my job and the farm. All my school friends were off doing their own internships far from Ponyville, and the staff here aren't exactly the most friendly bunch to new doctors. No offense, Dreamer. Sure, I always had my family, but I couldn't talk to them about that. Apple Bloom was too young to hear such stories, and Big Mac? We talk about the farm and how things are going, but I can't talk to him about how I'm feeling or the problems I'm facing. How do any of my problems stack up to his? So really, Twilight, you were my outlet. I could talk to you about anything, from the lack of friends to the stresses of the job, and you were there to listen. Again, at first I didn't know if you listened or even cared what I said, but it was a relief to just be able to talk at someone freely. I didn't realize you actually enjoyed it until a week after we had started our walks, when I had a few days off. Dr. Rose told me you had asked about me when I didn't show up, and seemed a bit upset about my absence. Then he handed me something you had created in your arts and crafts session. It was only when Applejack paused that Twilight realized she was leaning forward in her bed, hanging onto every word. Reaching into one of her pockets, Applejack produced a folded piece of purple construction paper. She offered it to Twilight, who glanced up quizzically before taking the object from her. Applejack nodded and gestured with a hoof. Go ahead, open it up. Twilight had barely moved her hoofs when Applejack inhaled sharply, freezing her in place. Carefully, she added as she watched Twilight's hoofs. Twilight sniffed before proceeding with exaggerated care. It turned out to be a very prudent choice. She had expected something simple that fit their view of her. Dwight passed at glued to paper or a crayon drawing, perhaps. What she had was beautiful. Fragile, yes, but magnificent. It unfurled like a purple and orange flower blooming in her hoofs. forming a 6-pointed star reminiscent of the one on her flank. Each strip of paper was cut and glued together with an exacting attention to detail. It might have been made from school supplies, but it was an impressive feat. In the middle of the artificial flower there was a message inscribed upon a small circle of white paper. "Hope everything gets easier for you soon. Your friend, Twilight Sparkle." The thin lines of intricate calligraphy demonstrated more of the careful work that went into its construction. The simplicity in the message made the effort put into the writing more profound. "That's something else," added Dreamer after peeking over to see the item. Twilight ignored him as she reread the message a few times. She silently handed it back to Applejack. It was her handwriting. "Yeah, it really is." She smiled as she folded it back up and carefully returned it to one of her pockets. "So after that, Dr. Rose made it part of your therapy to walk with me every day, Twilight. Soon enough you were as talkative as I was. Of course, you wanted to talk about stuff like history or arcane theory, things that were far above my level on the best of days. You're one smart pony, Twilight, and also I didn't understand a lot of it. The least I could do was return the favor. I know that you're still the same mare that listened to all my problems when I didn't have anywhere else to turn. And although you might not remember any of it right now, I like to think that you're still my friend." Twilight stared at Applejack in the quiet pause that followed the end of the story. She struggled to find her thoughts. How was she supposed to handle this? The story had been filled with errors, there had been some believable elements, but they couldn't account for all the incongruities that dominated her narrative. Applejack had been so honest, so real, that Twilight couldn't ignore how invested she had become as she listened to the mare's story. There wasn't any deceit in her words, despite most of them being fabrications, and the flower, her supposed gift to this Applejack, it bore all the hallmarks of something Twilight would have made, but she knew she hadn't made it. What was she supposed to believe? Without speaking, Twilight leaned over towards Applejack. Seated beside her bed, Applejack was close enough that Twilight could bring her nose just inches from her face. She paused there, staring through Applejack's green eyes as if they were windows into the soul. The proximity was enough to garner an anxious murmur out of Dreamer. She ignored him fully, her watery eyes locked onto Applejack's own, searching for something hidden there. Those few heartbeats dragged on for an eternity, but Twilight's confusion faded. Eventually she nodded, a barely perceptible movement in the head that was as resolute as a shouted declaration. She had seen enough. She had made up her mind. Twilight wrapped her forelegs around Applejack and hugged her tightly. "I'm still your friend, Applejack. I will always be your friend. Whatever happened can't change that," she promised Applejack, her voice firm iron even as her tears dampened her Applejack's coat. "You don't remember my life, and I don't remember yours, but I know that it is you in there. I can see it, sense it, feel it, and together we will make things right." They embraced like sisters who had been separated for far too long. Whatever the cause that had brought her to this world, Twilight was certain of one thing. Applejack was here with her. She might never be certain about why this had all happened, but she could be confident of one thing. Even in a world where her past was considered a delusion of a sick mind, she still had her friends. She had to believe that. Closing her eyes, Twilight cried silently into Applejack's shoulder as she held firmly onto her friend. The fear and loneliness that had plagued her since awakening was banished for a few blessed minutes, seeping out through her tears as if she was purging herself of a poison. It didn't matter if she was still imprisoned, if everyone in her life thought she was crazy, or if her past had been forgotten by all. She could still feel the bonds of friendship there, a comforting fire in the depths of winter. As long as she had that, she could find a way home. There was nothing fake in Applejack's smile as she hugged her friend back.